Greetings. If you're watching this video, you've reached another episode of the Hawkins STEM Chronicles. Now, I have a very good friend with me, and by recording this, do I have your permission to record?
You do.
Okay. Now, only your first name.
Michel.
Okay. Well, we're going to start this off a little bit differently before we even get started. Michel, I owe you an apology, and I'm the kind of guy that if I'm wrong, I'll tell you straight out I'm wrong and I'll apologize. So I have been introducing you for quite some time, or talking about you behind your back, whichever one you prefer. I've been saying that you were an agronomist.
I'm a soil scientist.
You are a soil scientist. In other words, you study dirt.
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting to me because I grew up next to a woman who used to ditch the dirt. She used to collect dirt, but you know, anything that went on in the neighborhood, good or bad, this woman knew about it. But you actually study the properties.
The physical dirt.
Yes, the physical
soil,
actual dirt.
Yes.
Now, how did you get into STEM?
Well, my dad's an engineer, and it turns out my two siblings are also in STEM people. And so I think we were kind of naturally leaning that way, and we all liked math as kids. I know a lot of people don't, but we did. But then I thought of doing a lot of different things when I went to college. I thought of journalism. I thought of becoming a teacher. And then I worked for a nonprofit for a while doing kind of policy in agriculture, though. And I realized that my best skills are probably in science.
Okay.
And I by then knew a fair amount of agriculture, so I decided to work on the science side of agriculture. So even though I'm not an agronomist, not trained as an agronomist, actually a lot of what I do is similar to what an agronomist would do, which is studying crop growth and how managing crops affects their productivity, the environment, economic performance, all that stuff.
And how people eat.
And how people eat, yeah. And also, so as a soil scientist, what I'm especially interested in is how we manage things improves or is bad for the soil. Mm-hmm. And try to focus on how we can improve soil quality and soil health, which has a lot of ramifications for environmental quality, for the productivity of the land itself, and basically those two things.
So now let's go back for a second. When you started college,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you just went to college and you decided at that point you wanted to go into STEM, or did you have to really, because you mentioned there was some other areas you thought about doing, but class-wise, when did you make the decision finally you were going to do science?
My first year in college, I took chemistry, and it turns out I was pretty good at it. Mm-hmm. And the chemistry department wanted me to be a chemistry major. And I was like, well, that's pretty difficult because you have to take physical chemistry,
yes,
also known as PChem.
Uh-huh.
And I knew that I knew that I'd rather understand how life works. And chemistry is very critical for that. But I really wanted to be a biologist.
Okay.
And that stems in part, so to speak, from my interest as a kid. We did a lot of hiking and camping as a family.
Okay.
So we were out in the wilds a lot. And as a 8-year-old, I became interested in bird watching. And so that's my passion, is bird watching. And what I really wanted to do was work somewhere in the environmental world, whether that was, and that's I knew I was going to be a science major, but I wasn't convinced I was going to work in science when I was an undergraduate, because there's so many areas you can work in. As a scientist, you could work in DC, for policy. There's a lot of scientific understanding that needs to be part of decision making. So I thought about that. I thought about journalism. I thought about a lot of ways that I could apply the science piece of me. So I made the decision to be a scientist, to be a science major fairly early on, but I didn't make the decision to be a practicing scientist until after I graduated from school.
Interesting. And your family is a STEM family, right?
Yeah. Even my mom's good at math.
Wow. Gee. Okay, so you're going to school. Back up a second. So you're growing up, and you've got siblings, and you all are good at math. How often were you and your siblings working on math together?
Never.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So my brother's a year older than me. My sister's 6 years younger than me. But we never did math things together. That was just a class in school that we enjoyed.
Okay.
But my brother and I did bird watching together all the time, which
Okay.
is STEM related. Like
Yeah,
STEM,
it's a STEM hobby.
adjacent, if not STEM. Yeah, yeah.
So now, so did you ever have any problems with math growing up?
It didn't. I had to work at it, but I
Uh-huh.
enjoyed problem solving, and I enjoyed trying to understand how the problem is solved. But then later, as math became more complicated, kind of understanding how much math is used to make the world function.
Okay.
Once you start taking, well, algebra is kind of interesting, right? But the real more complex types of math, calculus, where you start understanding rates of change and slopes and all that stuff. And then I even took some higher level math in college, which I can't remember any of it now, but linear algebra and can't remember the name of the class.
Well, now, that raises another question about, you were saying that one of the things that you did was you were looking at math, but you were looking at this as a way of solving problems.
Both solving problems, but understanding how that math helps you see the world in a different way.
Okay.
Like once you start looking at change over time, which is part of what you get to with calculus, and the rate of change, and you realize how much that stuff is critical to all kinds of different fields that are, maybe more physics related or engineering related. But math is the basis of all that. And the math is also the basis of physical chemistry and things like that, right? So it's, the way I think about it is, and I'm a biologist, is biology requires an understanding of chemistry. To really understand basic chemistry, you really have to understand physics. And to really understand physics, you have to do math. So all those
Okay.
things are very closely tied together. So even though I'm a biologist, and not all biologists are this way, a lot of biologists go into biology because they don't want to do the heavy math or the chemistry. But I think with my broader interests, it helps me be a better biologist as well.
Because your wife is a biologist.
She's a biologist too, yeah. So I say I'm a soil scientist, but soil science is also there's life in the soil. So I'm actually a soil microbial ecologist.
Okay.
Is my training.
Ooh.
It's a mouthful.
But now, so I have a friend. Believe it or not, I actually do have friends.
Do you?
Yeah. But we have a friendly discussion every now and then about, he holds out that economics is not STEM. And I say, oh, yes, it is STEM. Because when you're talking about measurements, you're talking about rate of change over time. Yeah, you're talking about math, but you're also talking about econ.
Yeah, the dismal science.
Well,
Yeah, no, it's a good. I've had those debates as well, and I've fallen on both sides of it actually. In that the kind of the in science, kind of the what makes science to me is that you can do an experiment. So you have to have a control and you have to have a treatment and look at the effect of that treatment on the results, right? That's very difficult to do in economics, right? Because you have to have some people follow a policy and others not follow it.
well,
Right?
yeah, but
Or-
you could look around the world and see, you have an idea, you have, and you say, okay, well, these people are doing it this way,
Yeah.
and these people are not doing
Yeah,
it
but
this
you
way.
don't have you don't know if those people are doing it differently because of something inherent to begin with. So you don't have a randomized experiment.
True. And so yeah, you can kind of see which way,
But at the same time, there's a lot of global change research that's very similar to economics. You can't do a treatment. We're doing a treatment on the whole system at the same time, right? And so, yes, that's where the lines get blurred in terms of, is economics a science or not? Because clearly climate change science is a science, and they have some of the same limitations that economics does in terms of. So I agree. yeah, we don't need to go into that
Yeah.
little hole, but
And we can another time, especially if we get some friends together.
there you go.
Now, let's take a moment. You are a professional scientist.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I find fascinating is, yeah, you're a professional scientist, but as a birder, you're also an amateur scientist. You're taking a lot of what
Right.
you've learned professionally and you're putting it towards your hobby. And what gets me about that is we have a neighbor, and I'm not going to mention his name because I got to call the guy. I always got to call. He is an astrophysicist by training and by profession, but his hobby is he's a birder.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you mentioned this to me
Yeah,
the other day, yeah.
So, yeah, we got to try to catch up with that guy.
Speaking of which, there's a yellow rumped warbler right over there.
Oh, yeah. I wonder. Well, I'm going to try to record that and put it up on the thing. So now, being in science, what kind of? All right, two questions. First of all, what kind of habits do you think one can pick up from the study of science, technology, engineering, and math?
Habits. Like brushing your teeth?
Well, yeah, twice a day, and make sure you're using a mouth rinse with high pH.
Well, I have to admit, one of the challenges for me in being a scientist is you have to be very disciplined, and you have to be very systematic in how you do things, which I don't think as humans we tend to be that way. We tend to kind of follow up our paths this way and that. Which you also have to do in science when you're looking for ideas and figuring out what you're going to work with next. But to actually conduct scientific experiments, you have to be very rigorous and rigid in a way that, for me, can actually be challenging. But so in some ways, I think science is, and that comes back to what I said about math, that I enjoyed math, but it doesn't come to me naturally. I just have to sit down and be very rigorous. And then once you get to the end and find a solution, that's very exciting.
Yes.
But it takes that discipline, which some days I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think we've all. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you become a professional, right, you kind of have to do it all the time.
Yes.
And that can be, for me, challenging.
Now, so talking about the habits, let's talk about like what are some of the personal things that you think have enriched you having been in STEM? What do you think that you've gotten most out of STEM?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. I have to think about a bit.
Okay.
Well, I guess there's that satisfaction of finding out new things, right, and having a better understanding of the way the world works, or at least some little piece of it. That's very satisfying. And I actually I have a PhD, and I got a PhD to teach, but my current job is just 100% research. Is that an issue with the helicopter?
No, not really. I mean, people know it's a helicopter, and at least it's not landing on us. It's just going by. I don't know if that's a news helicopter or what.
Blue and yellow.
Oh, okay, yeah, and that's.
I kind of lost my train of thought, but ask the question again.
What are some of the things that you've gained in your life because of STEM that you probably wouldn't have gained had you not been in STEM?
I guess in terms of not gained had I not been in STEM, it's a fairly deep understanding of some aspects of how the physical world operates. I think that's probably there's a lot of other things I gained from being in STEM, like colleagues that are very interesting and fascinating, and I do a fair amount of mentoring of younger people. Even though I don't do official teaching, I have students and things like that. That I appreciate a lot. I really enjoy that, passing on what I do know. But, they could do that in a lot of different fields.
Yeah.
So that's not unique to STEM, I don't think.
Now, let me ask you, and you kind of anticipated the next question.
Uh-oh.
Tell me about some of the most interesting people you've met because of what it is you do, because of STEM.
Oh, wow. Maybe I lose sight of that after 40 years of doing this because, there's been a lot of people I've met over the years. And the ones that are fascinating in STEM, I'm maybe kind of used to that. And so now I find people outside of STEM maybe even more fascinating. But that's a bias of just being in the medium.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of very smart and even famous scientists that, You get to meet them and learn, and some of them, I'm friends with them, and you learn these are just regular people.
Yeah.
And they have all the same challenges that many of us have, whether it's, whatever, all us humans have challenges. And a really, really good scientist is just another human being who just has a knack for doing a specific thing. And they are as imperfect as any of us in some other aspects of their lives, but they might be really good at that. And at the same time, I've met a lot of people that, even though they might not be the most famous scientists, they're just amazing people.
Yes.
And some of the very good scientists are amazing people too. It runs the gamut. There's huge diversity out there. In my field, in soil science and agronomy, when I first got started in the late 1980s, the meetings, we'd go to annual meetings, and almost everyone would be a suit and a tie, and almost everyone was a white male.
Mm-hmm.
And now, 30-something years later, it's much more diverse, it's much more relaxed, many more women, many more people of different national origins and backgrounds, lots of not as much racial diversity as you might want, but it's getting there, so it's changed a lot. So
that was one of the things about my father, having been in biochemistry. From time to time, his colleagues would, he'd invite them over. Sometimes it was there because they were talking about something related to biochemistry. Sometimes they were just coming over to eat. And the first time I ever saw a woman wearing a sari was at home.
Huh.
I was like, what? I seen it on TV, but
Yeah.
And the first time I ever met a real, live, honest to God German was in our home.
Yeah.
So, I just thought the idea of, like you said, being able to interact and meet and connect with people that are different from yourself and that encompass the whole globe.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful thing about going to meetings. You don't necessarily get that on your day-to-day, because that all depends on who your colleagues are. But yeah, soil science and agronomy are practiced every country in the world, right?
Okay.
Everybody has soil and everybody needs to grow food, and so it's very diverse. And you can go to meetings in all kinds of countries if you have the wherewithal and the desire. So,
which kind of takes me to the next thing. And I got to figure out a way to word this so that it's something that you can say about. But because of what you do, because of what you study, is there anywhere on the planet you couldn't do what it is you do?
No.
Exactly.
Well, maybe the ocean.
Okay, maybe the ocean.
Maybe the ocean, but there's one of the things I work on is the cycling of nutrients, carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. That happens all over the planet.
Yeah.
And on a global basis, the ocean's a really critical part of that. So even though I don't work in the oceans, and I probably wouldn't be able to bring my skills to stuff in the ocean, I could do microbiology part, but when you start working on those issues, they're all global issues. So what we do here, what we do in our backyard, affects, in our case, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay, of course, connected to the ocean. The ocean is an important part of the global climate, one of the things that controls and is impacted by climate, and so everything's connected. So I'm also, I said, I'm a soil microbial ecologist. So I'm an ecologist. So a critical piece of ecology is understanding how different organisms interact, but how they interact with each other, but how they interact with the environment and how the environment impacts them. And a big part of the ecology that I do is these nutrient cycles. And so even though I work in agriculture, I also work with a lot of people and have colleagues that don't know very much about agriculture, but we have a shared interest and knowledge of nitrogen cycling, for instance.
Okay.
And so...
Now, quickly, talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Explain nitrogen cycling.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a 5-year-old might be a little challenging, but
okay.
I'll try.
Yeah. Pretend you're talking to Rocky.
Okay. Woof, woof, woof,
Yeah.
woof. Okay, so you remember the table of elements from your
Yes.
from your 5-year-old class? You haven't had that as
no,
a 5-year-old yet. I'm going to talk to you more as someone who's seen a table of the elements. How's
Okay,
that?
all right, high school.
I think that might be fundamental to having a better understanding, at least the way I'm going to try to explain it. So everything's made out of elements.
Right.
We're all made out of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, a bunch of others, right? We even have iron in us, right?
And we're breathing and,
we're breathing.
expelling a gas.
Yeah, we're taking in oxygen, we're exhaling CO2.
Yeah.
So, and that's all part of the oxygen cycle and the carbon cycle.
Mm-hmm.
We also eat nitrogen. Every time we eat food almost, we have nitrogen because everybody knows what protein is, even maybe a 5-year-old does.
Yeah.
Protein is made up of, if it's called a protein, it has to have nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one of the elements that makes up the molecules that make up protein. And we all need protein to survive, right? And we eat protein, and everything we eat either stays in our body to help us build and to metabolize, or it comes out the back end, right?
Right.
So this is part of the nitrogen cycle by us taking in nitrogen and either pooping it out or peeing it out.
Rocky can definitely tell you about that.
There you go. And so all animals do that, right? All insects do that. All birds do that. They take in nitrogen and they expel nitrogen. So that's a piece of the nitrogen cycle. So the idea of a cycle means that a molecule of nitrogen that is in the air, for instance, is going to return to that same place after it cycles through a bunch of different other places. So, like, we're swimming in nitrogen now.
Right.
The atmosphere is 79% nitrogen. That nitrogen is double bonded, so there's two molecules that are tightly tied together with a triple bond. I know we're getting beyond the 5-year-old now.
Yeah.
But so nitrogen's everywhere here. And these plants need nitrogen. They take it up from the soil. But they can't use even though they're swimming in nitrogen, they can't use that nitrogen because it's triple bonded.
Right.
And so it's not usable. So they have to take it up from the soil. So the nitrogen in the atmosphere gets converted to soil nitrogen by bacteria, primarily by bacteria that convert that double bonded nitrogen to a form that plants can use. That's called biological nitrogen fixation.
Right.
And for millions of years, that's the only way nitrogen really got into the soil. But we invented something called industrial nitrogen fixation right before World War II. And that's how we created nitrogen fertilizers. So instead of relying on bacteria to move this nitrogen from the atmosphere to the soil and into the plant, we created nitrogen fertilizers so we could add that directly to the soil and made a huge impact on. One estimate is that the human population would only be half what it was if we hadn't invented that. But at the same time, that's been a challenge because we've put so much nitrogen into the soil that a lot of it leaks out. It's very difficult to keep it in. And so half of the problem, or about a third of the problem maybe, of the Chesapeake Bay being over-polluted is nitrogen. Because it just goes downhill. It flows with the water through the soil. It gets into the Chesapeake Bay, along with phosphorus and sediments as the other two biggies, and also other pollutants. But those things together lead to what are called dead zones, where you get a lot of growth of plants in the water because you have extra nitrogen. Those plants grow, they die, they fall to the bottom, they decompose, and when they decompose, there's other bacteria that are eating them up that use up all the oxygen. So now there's no oxygen for the crabs and the other organisms to live down there. So that's in a very short statement. Hopefully it's not that short, but is why the nitrogen cycle becomes important. And so eventually that nitrogen that is in the bay can then be converted back to the nitrogen that's in the atmosphere. So we've kind of made it around. It's actually a lot more complicated than that, but kind of gets to some of the basics.
That's the high level. Now,
off the top of my head.
What are the stereotypes about people in STEM you'd like to totally destroy?
That we're all nerds?
Well, yeah, number one, that's a word that we don't use at Hawkins STEM.
Okay.
We're going to banish that from the vocabulary.
The stereotypes of scientists. You know, since I'm in science, I might not see those as much as the regular population. One What are some of the stereotypes that you know of? And I
One of
don't
the
think about this
stereotypes,
very
the
often.
number one stereotype for me that I find most egregious, aside from, like you said, the nerds one, is that scientists are people who don't care about people. They care about things.
Oh,
And for
yeah,
me,
yeah.
that is like the worst
Yeah.
stereotype out there, because everyone I know
Yeah.
in science, technology, engineering, and math, not only are they people,
Yeah.
people,
Yeah, yeah.
but they care about people.
Yeah.
They have friends. They have
families.
family.
Oh, yeah.
They have extended families. They
Yeah.
care about, and one of the reasons why some of them went into STEM was because they care about people.
Oh, yeah, especially. And so one thing I find interesting, and a lot of those people will end up more in the medicine fields that are more directly benefiting people. It's like it's clearer that science is helping people survive, But this is one aspect in environmental science that I wish more people would go into it, because especially now that climate change has brought this all to a fore, I kind of understood this 40 years ago, that if we don't solve these planetary scale issues, we're kind of SOL.
Yeah.
Right? So why would I care about that if I don't care about people, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. I can see that stereotype. Sometimes scientists get so much into their thing, right? Because you do have to be, coming back to this, you do have to be focused, and you have to be, you do have to kind of shut things out every now and then just to think at a deep enough level. But a lot of fields have that, right?
Yeah.
Even economists.
Oh God, don't even get me started.
All fields have that. A gymnast that is working on the Olympics has to be that focused too, right? And so, at a time, when somebody's in that state, they might not seem to be super friendly or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you come up with a stereotype, I suppose. But
That's a whole other set of discussions.
Yeah,
But
that
listen, it's Michel. It's been great talking to you. Wait a minute. No, we got to go this one last question.
Okay.
All right. We got to talk about being a birder.
Okay,
Because you
let's do
and
that.
your brother both, when you were kids, you used to look at birds. Now, where did you two grow up?
In Massachusetts,
Where in Massachusetts?
suburbs of Boston, Lexington specifically.
Okay. And why don't you lift up your
Oh yeah. So I
got your binoculars
and I could
on
look
here.
at look at that, a yellow-rumped warbler. It's migration time.
We're going to try to turn around. Actually, when we cut from this, we're going to take a picture of the yellow-bellied warbler.
Yeah. Oh, there's the yellow-bellied sapsucker and the yellow-rumped warbler. They're both here right now.
Oh, okay. I guess that lets everybody know I'm not a birder. But
I'll work on you.
yeah, we got plenty of time to do that. So you grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And obviously Massachusetts then may not be Massachusetts now. It's probably, built up a whole lot more where you grew up at.
Yeah, probably.
But was there like a lot of parkland around? And
Yeah, there was some. Actually, one of the best places to go bird watching is the Mount Auburn Cemetery I think it's in Cambridge or Boston, Massachusetts. And the reason that is a very good place to go bird watching, in the same way that Central Park in New York is very good, is you have a lot of built environment around there, but you have a lot of green, a big green spot in the middle of a bunch of built up stuff, so the birds congregate there.
I don't care what state you're in, get outside, get some fresh air, walk.
Yeah.
Walk yourself, walk your dog,
yeah.
walk with your friends. And, do yourself a favor. Take a look at nature. Take a look at the birds. If you're lucky enough, of course, I got some of my neighbors that don't feel this way, but if you're lucky enough to have deer running around, look at the deer.
That's right.
Because I got neighbors that hate deer.
Well, you might have someone on camera that's not a big fan either.
Yeah, and for obvious reasons. But
Yeah, no. So coming back to the link between my STEM day job and my bird watching morning walk job, so to speak, those are very different to me too. Though, like bird watching is very meditative, and so that's a very different thing than working on a hard science problem. So even though you're both things are science related, STEM related, they use very different parts of my brain.
yes.
And that's actually a pretty critical part of it. And I chose not to go to become an ornithologist because I didn't want my job to ruin my pastime.
And an ornithologist is someone who studies birds.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's I thought of doing that for a while, and then I kind of realized that and maybe it works for some people. You know, there's some very famous bird watchers that are very good ornithologists, and they like them both. But I was afraid that if I studied birds on a scientific basis, I might not. It might the escape of bird watching might not be as escapey.
Okay. Well, listen, it's been great talking to you.
Ditto.
It's not like we're not going to talk again. We'll probably be talking tomorrow the way things are going. All right. Well, thank you again. And for those of you that like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. And tell your daughter and tell all your daughter's friends to watch and like this video
There
and
you
subscribe.
go.
Because that's the way that's the way the system works.
There you go.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you so very, very much.
Oh, thank you.
All right. See ya.
See ya.